the most powerful empire in the ancient world, once ruled nearly all of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. And then it disappeared. Not destroyed in a single battle, not defeated by a single enemy, but weakened slowly over centuries, until it finally collapsed from within. This is the real story of the fall of the Roman Empire. Rome did not begin as an empire. It began as a small settlement on the Italian peninsula, surrounded by rivals and constant threats. But through discipline, military innovation, and political strategy, Rome expanded. It defeated powerful enemies like Carthage, absorbed neighboring territories, and built alliances across the Mediterranean. In 27 BC, Augustus became the first emperor, ending the Roman Republic and establishing the empire. Under Augustus, Rome entered the Pax Romana, a period of peace that lasted nearly 200 years. During this time, trade routes expanded, cities grew, and Roman culture spread across continents. Roman engineers built roads, bridges, and aqueducts that connected the empire. Its legal system became the foundation of many modern laws. By 117 AD, under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest size, stretching from Britain to the Middle East. Over 60 million people lived under Roman rule. Rome was not just powerful, it was the center of the world. But expansion came with consequences. As Rome grew larger, its system became more complex and harder to control. Messages could take weeks, even months, to travel from Rome to distant provinces. Local governors began to gain more autonomy. Corruption spread as oversight from the center weakened. At the same time, the empire's borders stretched across thousands of kilometers, from Britain to the Middle East. These borders were constantly under pressure from outside groups, especially the Germanic tribes. To defend such vast frontiers, Rome had to station legions everywhere. That meant more soldiers, more money, and more administration. More control required more resources, and more resources created more pressure. The system began to strain under its own weight. It was no longer sustainable. Rome was no longer expanding efficiently. It was struggling just to survive. The situation worsened dramatically in the 3rd century. From 235 to 284 AD, Rome entered the crisis of the 3rd century. During this time, emperors were overthrown one after another, often by their own armies. Most did not die of old age. They were assassinated. The army became the real source of power. Generals declared themselves emperor, leading to constant civil wars across the empire. At times, Rome split into multiple competing regions, each with its own ruler. There was no stability, no continuity, no control. The empire was no longer governed by law, but by force. Rome was no longer a unified empire. It was tearing itself apart. As political chaos spread, the economy began to collapse. Wars drained resources, the government raised taxes to compensate,
farmers struggled to survive. Many abandoned their land or became dependent on wealthy landowners. This led to the rise of large estates and the decline of small independent farms. Rome also devalued its currency by reducing the silver content in coins. This caused inflation. Prices rose rapidly. Trade slowed down as trust in money declined. Production decreased across the empire. At the same time, wealth became concentrated among a small elite. The rich became richer, and the poor became poorer. Social tension increased. The foundation of the empire was collapsing. The Roman army, once the backbone of the empire, began to change. Fewer Roman citizens were willing to serve. Years of war, economic hardship, and instability reduced recruitment. To fill the gaps, Rome increasingly relied on foreign soldiers, including the Goths. These soldiers were often loyal to their commanders, not to Rome itself. Some were even allowed to settle within Roman territory, maintaining their own leaders and traditions. Over time, the line between Roman and foreign forces began to blur. The army was no longer truly Roman, and when loyalty weakened, control disappeared. The force that once protected the empire could no longer hold it together. As internal problems weakened Rome, pressure from the outside began to grow rapidly. For years, various groups had been moving toward Roman borders, some fleeing war, others seeking land and wealth. Among them were the Visigoths, pushed into Roman territory by the advancing Huns. At first, Rome allowed them to settle, but poor treatment, corruption, and broken promises led to rebellion. What began as migration slowly turned into conflict, and then into war. In 410 AD, led by Alaric, the Visigoths marched into Rome and sacked the city. For 3 days, Rome was looted, wealth was taken, buildings burned. For the first time in nearly 800 years, Rome had fallen. The shock was enormous. Rome was not just a city, it was a symbol of power, order, and civilization. And now, that symbol was broken. But this was only the beginning. In 455 AD, the Vandals, led by Genseric, attacked Rome again. This time, the destruction was even more systematic. For 2 weeks, the city was stripped of everything valuable. Temples, palaces, homes, nothing was spared. Nothing was left untouched. Rome was no longer untouchable. It had become a target. At the same time, other groups continued to push into Roman territory. The empire could no longer defend its borders. It was collapsing from the inside and from the outside. In 476 AD, Odoacer removed the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus. There was no great battle, no final moment of glory, only silence, and the end of the Western Roman Empire. Rome did not fall in a single day. It collapsed over centuries through countless small failures, not because of one enemy, but because it could no longer hold itself together.